short range, aren't they? So item 3 on the agenda then is to receive any declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? There are none. Thank you. Item 4 then is public question time. We have nobody in the public gallery. Do we have any written questions before? We have no public questions. Thank you very much. Next item is number 5, which is reports from the local pension board. So you'll have seen the updates, both of their minutes and the report, which was attached, I think, page 19 onwards in the documentation. First of all, does anybody have any issues with the minutes? Otherwise, we will note them. Right, good. We'll note them as such. And then on the local pension board, we're graced again with Martin here. So I think what I'll do is just pass over to Martin to see if there's anything he would like to add.
Yes, I just pick out a couple of points, Chair, just to say that as part of that process of the annual report from the local pension board chair, is just to confirm that in our opinion, the council as administering authority is carrying out its statutory duties. Did want to pick out a few threads from my first year as chair and from March of last year. Initially in the year we looked at the gap analysis between the pensions regulators code of practice and what we're doing. So we brought those to board and to committee. And as with a lot of these things, it's not just a one and done. It is a continuing process for us as a joined up administering authority. We're expecting the general code to come through from the pensions regulator, which is consolidating about 10 of their previous codes into one code, which whether you're private or public sector, you'll have to adhere to. And part of that will be introducing what they call an effective system of governance, ESOG, which will be compelled to look at to see whether our governance, our attitude to risk is look at another gap analysis. And so it's good to keep that in the back of our minds, that we'll have to have quite an open discussions about our processes and our susceptibility to risk, and conduct a formal assessment, which will be open to see. Another thread that we've been looking at in the past year and we'll continue to look at is the what I thought was quite an obvious risk when I started in this post, and that's a single person risk, that a lot of our functions seem to be coming through with one or two people, and that need for resilience. And I know that we've had a structure review in this year, and again, it's something that as a board, and I'm sure as a committee, we'd like to keep an eye on and follow through, because there are obviously susceptibilities to illness of key staff members, absences, and recruitment elsewhere, which I think is a fundamental risk to our practices. The other risk we looked at is cyber risk. For the first time, we've been engaging, the fund officers have been engaging with their third-party suppliers. We've got a key relationship with Haywards to provide the pensions admin system. So it's important for us to have got reassurances about disaster recovery, susceptibility to any kind of ransomware, which puts up the internal systems. So we've received that for the first time this year. It's been an ongoing process that we'll look at, making sure not only our third parties, but our host here, IT host, is adhering to national security standards, that we get reassurance that there are processes in place like staff training, password complexity, a whole suite of security protocols being adhered to. So we've started that process this year, but we're in an annual process of getting those reassurances. And the final thread that I know the board has been interested in this year is on responsible investment, ESG, and I guess as we see in the later papers, it's an opportunity at the moment with the investment review, strategy review process to, and also the TCFD coming down the line, where the need for targets, metrics, and measuring of data emissions, and that looking at those responsible investment beliefs. So a really important time, I think, for the fund as well. So I think plenty done, plenty still to do. It would be our position.
Thank you, Martin. Does anybody have any questions?
I'd like to thank Martin actually for the report. Having been on this committee for 6 years, we struggled to see the relationship between the committee. We struggled to see what the point was. Always asked this question. I think this report does actually make it a bit clearer where the board sits alongside the committee. Never understood that fully before I read this. My one question actually is, at full council last week, disappointingly, Michael Lilly stood down from the board councillor rep, and no one actually took his place. I think it's really important as councillors to actually get that place filled with council rep on the board. So I don't know why Michael decided to stand down after 2 years on it. But I think at the next council meeting, perhaps email should go to all the leaders saying we do need someone on the board to get that link between council and the board. I know there's only 7 of you. If you've got one place unfilled, there's a couple of people who weren't available, that the board may not be quorate sometimes. Vital's council is actually that. I know Reg Barry held it for 4 years and did a good job doing it. You need the council to fill that role.
I think we'll all agree with that, Paul. I will write to all the group leaders saying that we need somebody. We need somebody, of course, who's not on a competing role in any sense, or on the committee. So having them separate from that, I think is quite important. I'll take it as an action on myself.
Even right, Councillor Lilly asked him to reconsider, having spent 2 years of getting into the system of the board. It's not something you can just pick up and run with. 2 years of experience on the board. Perhaps Councillor Lilly would reconsider, realising the important role himself, the time he spent on the board.
Particularly as there's a mandatory training which is required for the board. I think I actually mentioned that at the annual meeting. Not that I was trying to put people off taking on the role, but people do have to understand that it's not something one just turns up at and sits on. Statutory obligations as well. Right, thank you, Paul. Steve.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the report. Very, very interesting. Just wanted to pick up a couple of things on bullet point 2 on page 19 to risk of using key. I think that risk probably should be extended to all, even the lower level staff, hard to recruit, staff turnover. I'm just curious about the exact phrase you used, to losing people to resignation, disability, retirement. But obviously, you're all to retirement, that can be got around through succession planning. Resignation, possibly we are losing more than we should because paying the market rates very easily, work remotely, other pension. This is sort of curious about the phrasing people because councils are never lost a slip of the pen, as it were. But people go off sick, but we shouldn't actually.
Well, it is important to remember this is distinct from the council workforce as a whole, and one of the things is going to be looked at by the government when they introduce the good governance into legislation and statutory guidance is this separation. So it is different to your usual workforce. This is about the pension fund, and we have fiduciary duties to members and the pension fund and the pension employers. And so we need to make sure that we have staffing levels for the fund. And one of the reasons a staff member may leave is because of ill health. That's distinct from any other consideration. It's just looking from the fund point of view. There's a gap. Somebody leaves with a lot of experience. This is what it's trying to highlight the susceptibility to have one person in a role with a lot of knowledge, doing a lot of the work, whatever reason they leave. That was just giving examples to illustrate why people leave a particular role. It opens us up to a risk that things won't get done as well. And so, as I say, part of that good governance review is trying to remove pension functions from the ordinary considerations of the council workforce, and each administrative authority is expected to come up with a workforce strategy, particularly about their pension fund. So we'll see that later in the year, probably. Putting aside all the other considerations, like your pension fund.
Thank you, Martin. I did notice, Steve, when I was looking at some of the talked earlier about the statutory requirements for training, and there are requirements on there. I did look at some of the training modules which the board are required to do. I did not see how the provision was made for accessibility on those. So I can see that if one is computer literate and able to understand the content and is able to access it online with a screen, etc., etc., I can see how it's completed without too much difficulty at all. But if one is challenged in any of those areas, wasn't made aware, and there was nothing that I found online, what the alternate mechanism of accessing the training would be. But perhaps we'll leave that to the board to deal with. Yes,
certainly the point isn't that we're not open to members with disability, and we encourage to have members of disability. It is just trying to illustrate why some reasons why people take a different role if they're under a lot of pressure in particular.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Steve. Any other questions to Martin? Well, then we'll just accept those items formally at 5A and 5B, and thank Martin very much for his diligence echoing the words of Councillor Brading. The next one then is there are a couple of items on. Sorry, Vanessa. Welcome, by the way.
Could I just apologise for being late? Sorry, folks. I'm afraid the Arraton Valley was, for some reason, absolutely gridlocked. Apologies, Chairman. Thank you.
We understand and sympathise with your problems. Carisbrook was the same. Because we're a bit short on some key people today, which is a good example of when we were talking about resilience earlier, just how it manifests itself. Because of those, there are a few items on here that we are going to have to defer. Number 6 is one of them. Number 12, the update, is the other one of them. And on item 19, when we come to it later, I'll just be asking yourself, Councillor Churchman, if there's anything you wanted to add to it. But the formal report obviously won't be given because the officer isn't here. So we move then, therefore, on to item number 7, which is the pension administration strategy. And Matt is online, which is a good move.
Yeah.
Invite him into the conversation.
Good morning, everybody. Apologies for not being with you today in person, but I think you'd prefer me to stay here in my current state. This is a document I've been asked to put together, the pension admin strategy, and ask the committee for adoption. It has been reviewed by the local pension board. The original document that we first put together was back in November 2018. This document is very, very much out of date due to some of the improvements we've made to the administration service. The document here that we've put together has been done by the help of Martin and Barbara from the local pension board, and also the support of my team and Joe. The document has been drafted through the use of other local government administering authorities and adapted for what I believe is right for the Isle of Wight Council Pension Fund. So I'd like the committee to look at adopting this document so that we can use it going forward. It will support all our employers and also give us a little bit of backbone if they don't conform. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Can I start off by thanking you and Joe and Barbara and Martin for the work you put in on this.
Thank you.
It's a key document. It's something that we definitely needed to do, and it was manifestly out of date. So I think I'll throw it open to the committee to see if there are any questions to you. And I think the first one is from Councillor Lucioni.
Hi, Matthew.
Hi.
I'm new to this, so
Yeah.
I just want to ask on paragraph 6, where you said it started in 2019, but due to capacity issues and other work priorities, something we see quite a lot here. Has that actually changed then?
No, it's just that I was asked. It is actually a document that should be put together by governance, not by the administration. We should support them. But Joe asked me to put the document together because it's actually out of date, and we were having issues with some of the employers. So we needed a document that actually helps support employers and actually support the Isle of Wight Council Pension Fund. So we are a small fund. And I've just been asked to put the document together, so it's as simple as that.
Thank you, Matthew. Hope I meet you soon.
Yes, you too.
I think the review was very important and timely, and Matt's very correctly pointed out that we have had a number of issues with employers, particularly over the last year or maybe even 18 months, thinking about it. And hopefully the clarity that's in the document will assist those conversations. And as soon as they finally receive this, it'll give them some guidance in the expectations on both sides going forwards.
They have been, sorry to interrupt, they have been consulted, all employers, and we didn't have any response from anybody. So.
Right. Any other questions of Matt? No. Can I take it then that we adopt the strategy as defined? Yep, all the hands are going up. Good.
Lovely, thank you.
It's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you again for your work, Matt.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Right, next item on the agenda is item number, sorry, what was that? Somebody coming or going? Nope, just a noise. Is number 8 on the agenda, which is our risk management item. And on this one, I'm going to hand over to Joe C.
Apologies. Good morning. I can't give a huge amount of information on this, I'm afraid, because this is a prime example of the limited resources we have. Joe has been the person that's been instrumental in producing this document. However, what we're looking at doing is the risk register that's been presented to yourselves. We are looking that we adopt this register, and as it has been fully reviewed by the pension board. There's the covering report gives some information about changes from the previous document that you've received. Just a couple of them where we took one risk and we have segregated it out into 2, because so it doesn't become too cumbersome to be managed. And there's some risks have actually been closed as well. So I'd just like to see if you would be kind enough to note and adopt this register, please.
Thank you, Joe. You'll remember at our previous meetings, we've talked about the over complexity that there were in terms of the register, and we simplified it. Some of the categories have been concatenated down. I don't think that takes away anything from the risks in any way. In some ways it amplifies, which they are. And the key one, which has come up a couple of times and will continue to come up, is going to be one of personnel resilience on this. Given the size of our authority and the size of the staff ability to support the work that we do on pensions, our numbers are inherently limited, and I don't see that issue changing significantly. It's been that way for quite some time, and it's likely to remain that, unfortunately. So bearing in mind the caveat that Joe said in terms of the preparation of the document, first of all, to thank all those that have been involved in it. I've seen a number of versions of it, which Joe has forwarded on to me that I've gone through. I'm very happy with it myself, as is the pension board, but I think we should invite comments from the committee if any have got any Right, I think then what we'll do is we'll propose to accept the document. Is everybody happy with that? Yep, take that as unanimous. Thank you very much, and thank you again, Joe. Next item then is to receive a verbal update on the annual report and accounts. And I'm back to Joe C again.
This is actually something I do know about, so I'm happy to report on this one. It's just to really let you know that the annual report and accounts for 21-22 is still going on. We are awaiting the auditors, Ernst & Young, to conclude the audit of the Isle of Wight Council accounts, as the pension fund accounts actually form part of the Isle of Wight Council accounts. There was some issue regarding it was actually a pension document, and it was the confusion because of the dates and the valuation, because normally what would happen is the accounts would be signed off prior to the valuation being signed off. Because the valuation has been signed off, but the accounts haven't been signed off, they've now gone back and said they want us to revisit the pension report that is adopted by the council. They have actually sent through final testing samples, which I understand are with Matt, and he has arranged for a session with the auditors. So we're hoping that this will be resolved as quickly as it can be. It's very frustrating that we're being held up by the auditors and not by the staff. This has also had a knock-on effect on the 22-23 accounts, which I know aren't formally part of the minutes or the agenda, but I want to comment on these just so as you're aware. Obviously, with this question on the valuation that's being included in the council's accounts, the opening position on their report for the 22-23 was in doubt. This has recently been agreed. So we've actually requested the reports to be produced by the actuaries, and once they arrive, they will be input into both the pension fund accounts and the council accounts, and we will hopefully be able to produce the draft Isle of Wight Council accounts, which there's lots of accounts there, I know, so I apologise for that. And there is a possibility, however, that will not be done by the end of May because of this delay. And that's, as far as I'm aware, that's where we are with the accounts at the moment.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, I've been involved in this for quite a long time. It is a very complex issue. We've never found any other way, even with the resources of Chris Ward and Kerry Hobbleday engaged on it, and others as well. We haven't found a way of doing it. It seems to be not a problem on our end. It's very much a problem both of regulatory and resource ability on the point of the actuaries themselves. And there's nothing we can do to help them overcome their issue, other than it does threaten us in terms of compliance and formal publication dates. We're always very mindful of those. So I think the complexity will continue. All we can do is seek to manage it, but it does have a number of rolling issues in terms of getting the accounts signed off, because we need to do them in a serial fashion, and every one of them that we need to sign off has a dependency on some other documentation. Anyway, an ongoing process. Thank you for the update. Does anybody have any questions of Joe? Claire?
Is that on?
Yeah.
So you say that we've got that delay in the reporting, and we're quite a small pension fund. So are others that are even bigger having even larger delays? And is it just generally still going on around the country? Because obviously been on this 2 years and not seen any improvement in that, and it just sort of seems like maybe there's a wider issue.
We're not alone.
Thank
Far from it, I think.
There are actually some authorities that have got 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
open, but they haven't actually been agreed by the auditors yet, signed off. We've actually already published a draft annual report on the pension fund website. And as soon as we've got the final figures, this was agreed at one of the previous pension fund committees, we'll actually update with the final accounts position and update that report.
It is a complexity because although we like to think of the pension fund being in isolation from the council, of course, it's the council is very much an engine which is involved in the fiduciary relationship in terms of contributions and salaries, etc. And of course, we're all aware that the situation as regards several elements of that calculation are in flux. You know, inflation is relatively high. The pay settlement was far removed from that which was expected. The expectation that those figures were going to change fairly radically this year seems to have been delayed even further, and even central government and their figures are now anticipating that inflationary pressure will continue quite a long time. So it does bring into doubt, and I think what it does for us is increase some of the risks in the calculation, and that always unnerves people. Anything else? Any other questions? Are we happy then, with all those caveats, as far as we can at this stage, to go ahead and acknowledge the issues that have been brought forward in item 3? Yep. Everybody's so happy. Good. Thank you very much, Joe. We will await further developments. I share the frustration of Kerry, though. Okay, next item on the agenda is the triennial valuation, which is item number 10. And we are being asked here to note the completion of that valuation. You'll have seen the documents which have been produced on it, and those that have already been published, actually. The good news is that although there's been a general downturn in some markets, particularly the equities side, we've come out of it relatively well, and the pension fund is fully funded, which is a very good position for us to be in, and I'd imagine quite a continuing relief to all the beneficiaries of the pension. You might also have noticed in some of the calculations that those pressures I talked about, inflation and staff pay settlements, etc., have had quite a big impact on the calculation. So the degree of variance there is very high going forwards. Was there anything else you wanted to say about that, Joe?
No, this was just to acknowledge that the valuation has been completed and that we have published both the report of the valuation and the funding strategy statement on the pension fund website.
Thank you. So next item then, item 11 on the agenda, is a presentation from UBS. Yeah, thank you. A bit earlier. Right. We'll carry on making progress then. So item 12 is deferred, as we said earlier. We'll go on to item 13 on the work plan, page 185 in your documents. You'll all have had a chance to look at this anyway. I didn't find any issues with it myself. And I wonder whether anybody has any comments or questions on it. No? Anything any of the officers would like to say about it? No? Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say how useful it is to actually have the work plan set out in this way. I
Mm.
think it's actually very useful to have that, not only that timeline, but to have the items and the responsibility. I think it's really useful. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I like it too. And although it's not a formal sign-off process, having the various ticks on things as we go through, I think it just helps us at a glance to look at what the timeline is going forward. Right, then we'll receive and confirm that. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll go on to item number 14 on the work plan, which is in the capable hands of David.
Morning. So there's a kind of cover paper from the officers, which just gives a kind of high level position in terms of the value of the fund's assets and the performance. So I think the kind of brief headline there is the fund value rose over the last quarter due to positive performance across various markets. In terms of 14B, the more detailed paper on the performance, I'll pull out some of the key highlights from here as we walk through the paper. So the first couple of pages of that report give the wider market background. They say Q1 of this year was positive in terms of the outlook, and you saw some more positive numbers in terms of growth coming through, particularly at the start of the quarter, that resulted in most markets kind of going up in value. So equity markets generally up about 5% on average. Bond markets as well, you saw bond yields come in a little bit, which means the prices of the bonds rose. So again, some positive numbers there, but you'll see that, you know, the last 12 months, you've still got the period of volatility from September, October with the round about the mini budget, where you saw that big spike in yields, and generally with inflation pressures over the last 12 months, that, you know, and the interest rate rises feeding through into the returns on bond markets over that period. So as property is still a bit of a laggard as well, again reflecting that higher interest rate, higher inflationary environment. So the returns relatively flat over the quarter, but the last 12 months have been fairly negative as a result. We don't pull out specifically, but I would just touch on what that means in terms of the funding level. So although you'll see some negative returns over the last 12 months since the valuation, I would expect that the funding level would actually have gone up over that period, because the benchmark for valuing your liabilities is the yield, the return on government bonds. So again, with yields having gone up over that period, even with the impact of a 10.1% increase in people's benefits due to the inflation, overall I expect that the funding level of the fund will be in an even stronger position than it was at the actuarial valuation date. In terms of some of the other key highlights, slide or page 5 of the report gives the latest asset allocation position. I suppose the big points to note that on that are the change in the UK equity allocation. So the previous decision of the committee to terminate the investment in the Lion Trust UK equity fund and move over to the BlackRock fund has now been implemented. So you can see the shift in the asset allocation there across the two managers. The other points to note, the fund remains overweight to growth assets, particularly the diversified growth fund. And again, that's a point that we come back to in the strategy review later on in today's agenda. The ones that were underweight are predominantly on the income side, with the property allocation, which again we touch on in the strategy review, given the outlook, not looking to rush more money into property at this point in time, but we'll look to address that in due course. And on the allocation that you've got to private debt and infrastructure, again, they're still drawing down money, but again, part of the strategy review is a potential to allocate further funds to get them up to existing target and potentially to a newer target. The other point to note again is on the fixed income. So given the relative movements in bonds versus equities, you're now a bit more underweight to the fixed income allocation with Schroders. And again, we think that's getting to a point that it's probably worth looking at redressing that and doing some rebalancing, again reflected in the recommendations of the strategy review. In terms of the individual manager performance, on the following page, we've got the page 6, we've got the kind of highlights. So overall, you'll see there's a lot a lot more green on that page, which is positive news. So relative outperformance, even that very short period from BlackRock since the mandate's been funded on a relative basis. And again, some good positive numbers coming through from Newton, Baillie Gifford and UBS as well. The laggard, as I say, has been property, and that's partly due to the positioning of the Schroders portfolio. Still a bit more exposed to some of the retail and office sectors, which have not fared as well in recent times. No changes to our manager ratings. We just highlighted one personnel change at Schroders, and again, we touched on that as part of the strategy review, but haven't amended the kind of formal ratings as a result. So happy to leave it there rather than walk through the rest of the pages and just take any questions that you might have on the rest of the report.
Just one for myself then. It probably comes up later in the meeting in the other section of it, really. But the fact that we're overweight in some of those sectors doesn't, when I looked at the options analysis, doesn't seem to have a great impact in terms of what the future risk performance is.
Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely something we'll come back to. So the analysis shows there's not huge impact, but I think there's the kind of longer term, that's a kind of 20-year time horizon, or some of the 3-year risk time horizon. Really, what you don't want is to get too out of line with that, whatever your agreed target is, because there can be some positive benefit of rebalancing, effectively buying more of what's gone down in value and selling what's gone up in the value. So again, although no significant concerns from a risk perspective, I still think there is value in that kind of regular approach of thinking about rebalancing as and when you get a bit out of line relative to the target position.
We'll talk about it later then. I mean, clearly, whether it makes any dramatic impact on the risk assessment at all has to be balanced against the cost of actually affecting that change. So we'll save that one till later then. So any questions of David? Councillor Churchman.
Yes, Schroders seem to have taken a bit of a bashing, certainly on the property side. I can't quite understand that because we're short of farmland, we're short of housing, and I can't equate why the property investment side should be in negative. Can you see where I'm coming from? As I understand it, farms are being bought up at the moment at really high prices. The big farmers are buying up land. They see the writing on the wall because we've got to produce our own food. So how come Schroders property is, as I said, in the negative?
So in terms of the institutional investable property market, so the benchmark that you invest in and the market you invest in, so it's predominantly 3 main sectors that you would allocate to are offices, retail and industrials. So farmland and things like farmland and agriculture don't really feature in that main property index. You'd have to have a separate allocation. So I say it's in those 3 main sectors, plus you get kind of the other one which captures residential, leisure, things like that. So what we've seen is, particularly since the higher inflation started to come through, a real kind of scale back in the prices, particularly the industrial sector has been very, very competitively bid going into this crisis when there was a real lack of industrial units around the country. So you saw the yields really get very, very tight on industrials. And with that higher interest rate, higher inflation environment, you've just seen that kind of fall away. I think it's the sharpest decline valuations, particularly in the industrial sector, that you've seen since the global financial crisis. So that's the markets where Schroders are invested in. And then within that, they've been kind of more heavily weighted to the office sector. So although I said industrial had quite a big sell-off last year, the kind of forward-looking demand for industrial is still quite strong. There's still, lack of logistics warehouses and the kind of shift from traditional retail to online. So part of their challenge is they are still more heavily weighted in some of the office sector, and the office sector has a lot of doubts in terms of future working patterns, demand, and even the energy efficiency of the buildings, because that's where I think it's quite easier to build a warehouse and make that to whatever the standards are versus For companies looking to lease office space, they're looking for the highest possible quality. They're looking for the latest energy performance standards. So again, there's a bit of a kind of headwind against them with the portfolio's position.
I think what we've seen is a clear move away from, well, a reduction in the demand for offices with remote working. We've seen a reduction because of the high inflation rate of investment in various industrial sectors and manufacturing capabilities. Some stagnation in the distribution sector as well, probably impacted by the inflation figure. And altogether, I'm not at all surprised by the figure here. I can see all the rationale which is driving it. And of course, it is a sector where for Schroders to change their portfolio is a very lengthy process, a very slow process, over a period of time. And divesting oneself of property portfolios has always been very difficult. Would that be a fair assessment?
Definitely. And again, we'll come back to it in the strategy review, but thinking of, for example, transitioning into pooling, I was very mindful of the costs of trying to sell down property units. You've also seen, particularly with the volatility in the markets last year, private sector schemes, because of what happened, were selling a lot of their return-seeking assets to support their kind of de-risking plans. So that in terms of the pooled funds, there are big redemption queues waiting to still sell assets into the market. So you're looking at some big discounts if you were to try and do that. So it's why the transition, if you were to move Schroders at some point, needs to be carefully managed, and even the ability within their fund to restructure and move the sector allocations is quite challenging given the outlook for the market, where the prices.
And the same would be true of the non-industrial sector, where the high inflation has had a depressing effect on house purchasing and other aspects of that sector. Councillor Brady.
There is actually a good description on page 6, and I think it says about the Schroder Property Fund, a negative return with the lower property values caused by increased rates. I think that's very, very fair. And then, as you said, it's change of investment strategy is relatively simple compared to changing your property strategy, which is obviously more time consuming. So whilst it's a snapshot in time, confidence there that Schroders, the property market will bounce back. And we note the reasons. I think that's sufficient to cover, why it has dropped in the first quarter.
Right. Councillor Churchman.
Just one other question, going back to property again. Artificial intelligence, we've got one or two very large organisations saying they will massively cut jobs. So that again is another factor which will, I presume, people like Schroders will take into account. Could that actually make the whole thing worse because they'll have possibly more empty properties?
I think it's, yeah, another potential uncertainty, well, in particular over the use of office space. I'd say AI in terms of logistics and warehousing has probably got a more positive impact in terms of the use of space, but maybe not for people's jobs in those sectors. So yeah, it will definitely something that's on their mind, I think, particularly on the office space and what that means for potential usage and demand for that kind of property.
Right.
Following on from what both you've said and the chap here, property growth really has been in the warehouse sector in the last 5 years. People like Amazon expanding. Unfortunately, even top situated properties in London have been difficult to let because of this shift towards office working or downsizing and working from home. And in the retail sector, you've seen obviously several bankruptcies like Arcadia, Debenhams, House of Fraser have all been downsizing their portfolios. So there is a lot of retail property on the market. And as you say, it's very illiquid, whereas you can sell a share and you can receive the proceeds in 2 days, 5 days, depending on one's settlement date. Selling properties and shifting portfolios, whether you're changing the asset allocation, just divesting properties is a more lengthy process because you have to find a buyer for that property.
Thanks. Just want to clarify one point. I think you said, despite the fact that pension inflation was just over 10%, which is very high compared to any recent year, that hasn't actually had an overall negative impact on the fund valuation, that the fund valuation is still held up.
Yeah, so that will have increased the liability value, but I think it's been more than compensated for by the rise in bond yields, because clearly that's a kind of 1 year increase, although it will be, now it's now in the numbers, it's kind of will become compounded beyond that. But certainly the rise in government bond yields that you've seen will have, I think, more than compensated for that in terms of the value of the liabilities.
The difference there is that the rise in the bond yields could be a one-off. It's certainly a single item issue, whereas the increasing liability from the pay rises, for example, that line item gets baked into the figures and is compounded, therefore, afterwards, year by year.
Yeah, it's worth noting, clearly, actuarial valuations are measurement tools. You do it every 3 years to make sure you're on track. And it's about that, just maintaining a kind of sensible and stable approach to funding of the scheme. So it can cause challenges when you come to valuation points if your funding level is actually too high, even given the pressures around about contribution rates. But again, I think overall we're still in a positive position, but it's just maintaining that kind of trajectory that you've got stable and sustainable contribution rates on a funding plan as well.
Thank you, David. Any more questions of David at this time? No? Right. Thank you very much indeed. We'll formally receive and note then those reports as item 14. And thank you again. And then item 15 on the agenda is to note all of the items which have been circulated very diligently, I have to say, by Jo over the last 3 months. She did say to shout if we thought it was too much. Nobody has shouted, so I'm assuming that we're all working our way through this material as and when we can. Right, we'll take that as noted. Should we see if our guests are here again? Thank you, Jo. Number 11. Given that they were, I think they were indicated it would be roughly about 11 o'clock. Okay. So our guests who were given the indication of probably get to them at about 11 are still not here. Our guests who were given the indication of about 11 are still not here. I find that a bit concerning, really.
I did send a note down saying they were coming.
Okay. We haven't heard anything. Very odd. Just in time might be a little tight. All right, we'll go on to item 16 on the agenda then, which is members' question time. Do we have any members' questions? We do. Councillor Brading, well done.
I thought I'd ask a member's question, actually. Yeah. It's a question that's been asked of me, actually. I don't know whether Jo can answer it or not, but when people are employed by the council, they get various staff benefits, travel discounts and all that sort of stuff, and discounts in shops, bits, pieces. When they become staff pensioners, council pensioners, they're no longer eligible for any of those benefits. And I know in some companies, certainly in the company I used to work for, even when you're a pensioner, you still qualify for the staff benefits. So my question really is, why aren't council pensioners eligible for the staff benefits they have when they were employees, please?
I have absolutely no idea. I think you probably would be better off directing that. That might be an HR query rather than the pension fund committee, I'm afraid, because it would. I should imagine it's going to be someone from HR that will have negotiated it with the local tradespeople for these discounts. Sorry.
I do have a discussion going on a related topic at the moment. I had suggested at one stage that, given that this was a council, basically local authority wide negotiation, that the scheme should be extended to others. In fact, I'd specifically mentioned our town, parish and community councils, which I thought would be worthy of inclusion in the scheme, because we do include others other than people employed by the council. There are other beneficiaries, you know, with whom we have agency agreements who qualify as well. And given that we extend it to them, why would we not extend it to the town, parish and community councillors, and indeed why not to pensioners? There is of course the issue of the ID that needs to be presented, for example at the ferry ports and things, so we'd have to look at that. But I'll take it away as a wider issue, and I think Matt had his hand up online to say something.
Yeah, thanks. Basically it's down to the Isle of Wight Council as employer to decide whether or not that it should extend to the pension scheme. The pension scheme wouldn't have any facilities to actually organise any kind of scheme for its members.
The reason I asked the question obviously is, well, my wife is an ex-council employee. She's now retired. She's getting now a council pension, but obviously I get the benefits anyway, so it doesn't affect us. But several of her friends who worked in the schools with her and our pensioners, and they don't qualify. And that was the reason for the question. Yeah, it's just it's small perks. But and you talk about the ferry travel. Red fellow, I just showed him my last P60 or the last pay slip or whatever, or even your identity badge. They'll take anything that says Isle of Wight Council on it. They are. Red Funnel certainly aren't very fussy at all. Thank you. But if that can be taken forward, I appreciate it.
Thank you for raising it, Councillor Brading. I think it's an excellent idea. I'll walk around because I know Steve was the next first hand up.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I don't know categorically what the answer is, but two aspects to it. Firstly, I think other employers, big employers, do get the same sort of benefits. So it's not just the council as well. I think we get it as a big employer, not as the council. But secondly, in terms of identifying a council employee, I suspect if you do it by email, the first thing they would look at is it an IOW.UK email address and not just somebody else. So I think that's one practical reason why retired people might have difficulty. But in principle, obviously, I would fully support retired members getting it.
And as a standing member of the Civil Service Retirement Pension Scheme, I get it from that as well. But let's just work around in this way, because I think there are a number of hands that went up, and I think quite a few of them have been addressed. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually on the same point. We did actually, and if you could include it, I would be grateful. We did look at actually including our care leavers in that scheme, as we thought it would be appropriate to include them. But again, I think it was the matter of the ID that was the issue. So if you would actually include our care leavers, I'd be very grateful.
Happy to. Councillor Critchison. You were still on members' questions.
Approached, thank you. I've been approached by a member of the public about, so please forgive my non-understanding of this subject, but they wanted to know the Isle of Wight Council's where it stands on the divesting from pensions funds from fossil fuels and supporting the Palestinian campaign, BDS. I don't quite understand, but I'm wondering if we can get a statement on that. Does that make any sense to anybody? Because I didn't quite fully understand what this person was referring to. What campaign?
Fossil fuels.
There is actually a boycott and divestment campaign on behalf of the Palestinians. I know there are a number of entities following that in countries in some cases. But I don't know if anybody's got any further information today. We probably have to take that away as a question and look at it.
I think it's probably to do with the anti-Israeli feeling because of the conflict in Gaza. But it's possibly to do with anti-Israeli sentiment, the Palestinian settlements and the disputes between the Palestinians and the right-wing Israeli government. Plus, obviously, fossil fuels is a crusade for people, the protest groups that obviously closed the Dartford Tunnel and the Winnows Bridge, probably led by them. Very radical ideas that don't want people to invest in fossil fuels, BP, Shell, Exxon, Total. So it's
Steve had a question, and then I'll come to David, because you can probably pick up on all the points that are raised, I think. Steve.
I didn't have a separate question. Just going to clarify that the Palestinian bit would be against investments, Israeli companies. But that will be the issue that they are looking at.
Yeah, do we have a statement on that from the other? I remember some emails in the past, but I didn't take full understanding of them. So I'm wondering if we have an Advice Council statement on that. Thank you, Joe.
I'm not certain of whether we have a statement or not. It's certainly something we can look into. And if we want to actually then go out to the investment managers and ask them what our investments are in both fossil fuels and Israeli companies, that will do that. That's not a problem. But it will take a little bit of time for us to get the information back.
Good.
Yes, if that
So,
could be done.
Councillor
Thank you.
Andre, then I think I'll go to David so he can answer it all.
Thank you. I mean, I do have a view on this, that I think we do need to be very careful as a pension committee that we should remain not necessarily outside of politics, but we should be neutral. And whilst I have absolutely no reservations about issuing policies on environmental responsible investment and that kind of thing, ESG, I don't think that it would be appropriate for us as a pensions committee to actually be issuing statements that are specific to any one group.
You're dangerous. David.
So yeah, on the kind of fossil fuels, you don't have a kind of divestment policy. It's been about engagement, but you do consider that, and you'll see UBS shortly, hopefully, where one of your strategies does include some restrictions or criteria that they have for putting stocks in portfolio. On the specifics around about the kind of Palestinian action, there is a separate action, I think, with the Scheme Advisory Board, where they were written to about whether some of the holdings were effectively in breach of human rights, broke human rights conditions. That is still with the Scheme Advisory Board. They wrote back to the person who had put forward this proposal. I think they were still waiting to hear a response. So again, I think that's probably a matter, as I say, for the Scheme Advisory Board in terms of that political situation or the legal situation. And then once they have a view, no doubt they'll disseminate it and let you know what their view is on that. So.
I certainly, I guess it's because of the position of having the chair of the pension committee get lobbying emails that I generally don't reply to, which I think is a sound policy from lots of different groups. I've had recently, I'll give you a few recent ones, quite a few about Belarusia. I've had ones recently about poultry farming and chicken waste, and I've had others about methane production in the cattle industry. So there seems to be a lobby group on almost every topic, and I think for us to be embroiled in it would be very dangerous indeed. So a last question then, Steve, just to wrap up, I think. No, you're all done. David.
Just to give another example, so a live example of this is the Scheme Advisory Board is also looking at whether the LGPS is a Sharia compliant scheme at the moment. And again, they're looking for expert opinion on that. So that's one of the things that they are looking at.
All right, I think with that then we'll move on to get UBS in. They are here now. Just in time. Good. Lovely.
Could I
Councillor
make a
Churchman.
request, please? I know my hearing's not as good as it was, but could people please put the mic in front of them? This chamber is appalling for back echoes and the sheer bloody size of it. So you know, please, could you use the mics? So I'm frightened of missing something.
Do they actually detach so you can wear them around your neck or anything? No, I don't think so. Morning. Usually say.
Just to let you all know, there was a PowerPoint presentation that was circulated to Joe, but I obviously haven't got it, so we will circulate that ourselves after the.
Thank you, Joe. So first of all, thank you to welcome our visitors from UBS here today. I think the estimate that I got was to give you, if that's okay, a sort of 20-minute slot, and then we'll probably have some questions afterwards to follow up on from various quarters. But perhaps you'd like to just start off by introducing yourselves.
Red, I can talk. Fantastic. Thank you so much for having us this morning, and many apologies that we can't show our slides on screen. We deliberately didn't print out many copies is because our strategy is climate aware. So we're very aware of the unnecessary wastage, and that's why we thought we can be clever and to present it. So many apologies that you don't have anything, but at least you've got two of us in 3D. Just a very brief introduction. I'm actually your client relationship manager at UBS Asset Management. My name is Yuan Su. I've been with UBS for 8 years, and this is my fabulous colleague Rodrigo, who is the senior portfolio manager for the climate-aware equity strategies that you are invested in. Rodrigo is a PhD mathematician by background. And he's also been with UBS for a good 8 years. So we're probably going to celebrate our decade anniversary together somehow, at some point. But yeah, I will let Rodrigo to introduce himself.
Yes, morning everyone. Thanks again for the invitation. I think it's a first time in Isle of Wight, and it's really beautiful. So thanks again for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Just as Yuan was saying, a little bit of me, 8 years in UBS, part of the systematic and indexing team in UBS, and I think mainly the strategies that work are related to the climate aware strategies, in which you have allocation on the strategy. So most of the time it's working on the strategy and working with different teams such that we can give you the best service in UBS.
So for today, 20 minutes, we'll definitely fully utilize the 20 minutes. So the agenda that we have proposed is really for me to give you more of overarching background on what's happening at UBS. There's a lot that's happening at UBS, as you probably have read in the press with Credit Suisse, and how our index business fits within the asset management division, and how asset management division interact with the other part of the bank. And to recap a little bit on the genesis of the climate aware equity strategy, and then I'll pass on to Rodrigo to give you more sort of in-depth update on performance and on market themes, or on anything and everything that you may wanting to know as well. Does it sound like a good agenda? Yeah, fantastic. So I say a lot has been happening at UBS, but all for good causes. We announced that we're going to take over Credit Suisse as of 6 or 7 weeks ago. The deal will be closing in the next couple of weeks, is what we've been told from a legality perspective. That's the exciting bit because that's where the true integration will start. We're very excited in a way that it will make the two largest Swiss bank become together. And it's good from a culture perspective because there's quite a lot of similarities, but from what we can see, there's quite a lot of synergies that we will produce for our shareholders by having the two biggest financial institutions coming together. So we'll keep you updated for any other things that we see, but at the moment, there's nothing to report back apart from positive vibes that we will get from UBS. So UBS, we are a large Swiss international global systematic bank. There are 4 divisions within UBS. We are part of the asset management division. There's also the wealth manager. There's also the investment bank. There's also the Swiss corporate and personal bank. That's the 4 divisions that we have. Collectively, we have 70,000 employees managing in excess of $4 trillion of investable assets on behalf of clients like yourselves. 4 trillion, that's correct.
Chair, may I ask, how many noughts are there when you talk about trillions?
What mathematician, how many?
12, I guess.
Actually, it's a complicated question. It depends whether you use the American definition of a trillion or the British definition of a trillion. Same applies for billion, and the same applies when you're in Germany, whether you use the word million or not has a different context. But for our sake, it's 12 noughts.
Thanks, Chair.
Which will have more zeros? Is that the Americans? Point taken. Thank you very much. Oh, we'll take something back. Thank you. No. So coming down to asset management division, one of the 4 that I talked about, that's where Rodrigo and I are part of. We have a compact team of just under 4,000 employees for asset management division, servicing our institutional and wholesale and wealth management clients. We offer a broad platform of services that really suits our clients' needs, for example, yourselves. On our platform, we have a wide spectrum of capabilities from active to passive, from traditionals to alternatives across different asset classes. Now, with our very strong commitment in sustainable investing over the past 20 years, our clients really can benefit from our deep expertise in providing solutions that help you to align your investment goals with your sustainability investments. Index or indexation, it's a very integral part of our $1 trillion in AUM for asset management. At the moment, which you will see the slides when you receive it, at the moment we have just under 50% of our 1 billion invested assets in passive or rules-based strategies where climate aware is part of. And this is very exciting because we've been, from a sustainable investment perspective for sustainable index, we have been managing sustainable index for over 10 years with a very, very strong and stable investment team. And some of the senior PMs has been working together for a good decade or so, which really is a great way to showcase UBS Asset Management or UBS as a firm's strong culture of investing in our own people as well. So coming down to climate aware, the genesis of climate aware really comes from the opportunity of transition into a low carbon economy. The goal of the strategy is to generate passive-like returns, but whilst reducing the carbon emission for the portfolio. Now I'll pass on to Rodrigo to tell you more about our climate aware strategy, the objectives, the goals, and also more specifically performance, over the past year and some of the key market themes that we've seen. Is there any questions before I hand over to Rodrigo?
Perfect. Thank you. And I think I see some has some of the slides, so we can maybe use some of the slides in case you have it at hand. But I'll just try to make it very interactive, such that for the ones that don't have slides, you can follow the conversation on one hand, and on the other hand, just feel free to stop whenever you have a question. Happy to go in more detail. Maybe before we go into the details of what has happened, let's say in terms of performance and so on, maybe as a recap of the strategy, I think it's worth spending some time on recapping the strategy, because some of you probably, I remember a couple of years ago, we did the discussions with the members of your team, but for some of you probably it's quite new, the strategy. So I think it's probably good to get a step back and give a small refresher of what the strategy is, and then we can go a bit more in the details in the second step, yes. So if we go to slide 21st, that is the key differentiating aspects that we have on the strategy, yes. And a little bit as Yuan was mentioning, this, the origins of the strategy goes back to 2016, 17, working, I think it's a UK solution that we developed here, working with one pension fund in the UK. I think we believe we did an innovation there. And the idea at that time was saying, okay, well, what is a carbon solution? Yes, I think at that time was sort of saying, okay, let's grab the carbon data of companies. Let's say there is different ways to measure the carbon, but let's see the carbon emissions of companies. Let's select the worst 20% of these companies, extract them from a market for an equity portfolio, which is a benchmark, and that is a carbon solution that you can implement, yes. But when we start to analyze a little bit the data, we said, okay, actually, I can give you two companies, for example, in Europe, in the utility sector, that they tend to be sectors and they have high carbon emissions. But for example, one European company probably has less emissions than an American company is. And then I tell you, okay, well, the European probably has more emissions, sorry, than the American company, but actually this company is disclosing their data. Yes? They have the internal effort to compute or calculate their emissions. They enroll to the science-based targets, for example, initiative, which is an initiative that some companies in the world, they say, okay, well, climate is very important. Therefore, we expect to align our businesses to a 2-degree or 1-degree scenario in this number of years, yes? So if you see, well, only focusing on one data point, I think probably was too limited. We said probably we need more data points to really evaluate where the companies are with respect to its peers. And this global effort that we have to do as a society and as a global economy on bringing the global economy to a trajectory which is in line to a low carbon economy. So we start to develop that strategy and we say, okay, actually we are capturing climate, we are modeling climate risk, therefore we should call it climate aware, yes. So that was a little bit the origins of the strategy. I think on slide 21st, for example, is as Yuan was mentioning on the objectives. And just to reiterate, and you will see later on that argument on I think the way that we construct the portfolio is very conservative in the sense of we said, okay, we know what is the characteristics of an equity portfolio, a global equity portfolio. So therefore, let's build up a portfolio which is in line with some climate ambitions. But at the same time, well, climate is not the only risk that a portfolio has. Equity portfolio has industry, sector, stock risks that we need to taken into account such that we manage climate risk of a portfolio, but also we manage the other sources of risk in a portfolio, yes? So that translates, for example, in a deviation that we have from a global equity portfolio, in this case is FTSE developed, that we take what it's called tracking error, but it's how much risk we take with respect to that global equity portfolio. That is, I would say, is quite small risk that we take. Measuring numbers is around 40 to 50 bips that you will see in the metrics, but that allow us to use efficient that risk in implementing the climate ambitions, yes? For example, let's reduce the carbon footprint of the portfolio. Let's promote the rotation that the global economy has to do from fossil fuels to renewable energy and so on, yes? So again, in this slide 21st, the first point is saying, okay, we want to build up a portfolio that it's climate. It has climate as the key theme of the strategy. However, let's build up in a way that when you see the risk return characteristics of the portfolio is very similar to a passive allocation that you will have in a global equity portfolio, yes? So that's one aspect. I think the second aspect, which is the forward looking, it is again that analysis that I was mentioning of, we need to consider multiple data points to say, okay, these companies in the oil and gas sector or in the utility sector, these based on these multiple data points are the best in class because they are increasing their production of renewable energy, reducing their carbon footprint, or these companies, they are laggards on with respect to its peers, yes? And then it becomes sort of, if you see how carbon data gets disclosed, there is a significant lack of that data, yes? Like for example, companies, they tend to disclose the carbon data with more or less almost 2 years of delay, yes? So for that, you need to have more timely metrics that say, okay, well, it's important what they are doing in the past, but we also have to see what they are doing for the future, yes? And I think there is a lot of evolution on carbon data in the recent years. Like, for example, science-based targets is a very good platform that help us to have these forward-looking measures. To say, okay, well, actually, there is a group of companies that they are disclosing targets or objectives towards carbon reduction, yes? And the last part of this slide is on slide 21st, which is the engagement program. And again, I think you can bring the criticism, say, okay, well, you are building a portfolio, reducing in some companies your exposure or increasing in other companies your exposure, but what is the tangible outcomes that this portfolio can have, yes? And then it comes the engagement, both in an engagement program that we have some slides, which we believe it's actually help us to get real outcomes on the portfolio, yes? Like for example, in the voting season, our colleagues on the sustainable and impact team, they can, I think their experience is based on that. I think the sort of case studies that they have, happy to elaborate on that, but sort of working with companies, going into the voting seasons, saying, okay, well, companies, we agree or not, or we disagree what you are doing. Or most important, in the engagement program, yes, we cover around 70 companies nowadays in which we sat with the companies. There is this consortium called Climate 100, for example, that brings different asset managers, asset owners to say, okay, let's sit down now with Shell, for example, yes. And obviously, well, if there is a group of institutions like UBS, for example, and other asset owners and asset managers, it brings to the negotiation more power to say, okay, well, you should do something towards climate. This is what we believe you should be doing. And this tell us how you are going to implement this. And we completed this cycle 3 years ago, and the outcomes are really, really encouraging. Yes, like for example, out of these 50 companies that we started, only 5 they were saying, okay, well, sorry, I'm an oil business, and therefore I don't need to do anything there. That was the majority, the minority of this group. The majority, they start to show signals of starting to disclose their data or bringing experts to their institutions that they can model climate change, or starting to set up targets, yes? So I think that's, to be honest, from my point of view, is quite important because it sort of brings some tangible outcomes rather than building up a portfolio. That is important to have a portfolio that has certain characteristics, but it's also important, I think, on seeing what is I don't want to call impact, because impact in financial terms, it has a whole dimension, but impact of the portfolio in this case, yes. So this is slide 21st. Quickly on slide 22, it goes a little bit on the data points that we use. Again, as I was mentioning on mitigation, for example, of climate, we consider the carbon emissions of company such that we can compare is page 22nd. We can compare how companies are emitting CO2 into the atmosphere and compare with respect to its peers. Adaptation is this substitution that it has to be from fossil fuels into renewable energy or more broad into on climate technologies that are very important and create an opportunity on investments on climate. And the last part is the transition. We are more focusing on the transition aspects of the climate risks, saying, okay, let's evaluate which companies are reducing their carbon footprint, which companies are disclosing data, objectives, targets with regards to climate, yes. So we use all this data again. We tilt the portfolio. We said, okay, let's reduce the carbon footprint of the portfolio. Let's increase our exposure on renewable energy. For example, SSE in the UK, that they have a large investments on renewable energy. Reduce our exposures. For example, American Electric Power, an American company that generates electricity from coal. Or for example, Exxon, that it's a company that through the engagement program, we haven't seen much progress. Therefore, we decided to do an exclusion on those companies. So we sort of increase our exposure slightly on companies that we believe they are leaders in terms of climate, reduce our exposure on companies, and we manage the overall risk of the portfolio, including the climate risk, yes. So that's probably in a really nutshell what is the strategy about. Maybe I stop here 1 second to see if there is any question, yes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that introduction. Could you just give some sort of examples? You talked about engaging with companies, including like Shell. Any concrete examples of how your engagement has actually delivered some change in their actions?
Yes, so I think, again, that was the majority of the companies. Just to give 2 more examples, for example, the Norwegian company, I think, which is oil, which is Equinor. Equinor is a good example of a company in the energy sector. And if you see the pattern that is happening on energy, on oil and gas companies, is that they are becoming utility companies or energy companies, if you want to put it like that, yes. So first, Equinor says, okay, on scope 1, 2, 3, which in a second I will tell you what is that. This is our targets on carbon reduction, and on capacity on renewable energy. This is what we are going to increase our investments, capex on renewable energy, yes. So that's one example. In terms of utility companies like Eni, the Italian utility company, we sat with the company, sit with them, and then you see that the way that they have operated is saying, okay, we have 2 businesses here. One, which is if you want, the standard utility business, which is generation of electricity and so on, using still coal, for example. But then they say we create this new subsidiary of the company, which is just focused on renewable energy, yes. So probably that's examples, but to be honest, my colleagues on the sustainable team, they can bring more insights of that experience. I'm happy to follow up on that, yes.
So what you were suggesting in the intro was that almost there's a move away. I mean, this whole field demands a different approach from a purely quantitative analysis, which would have been applied to investments before, to more of a qualitative analysis, because you're using a number of subjective elements as well in your assessment in terms of the accuracy of the data, their adherence to standards, and also disclosure of information relating to that field. Those are more subtle judgments than simply quantitative, aren't they?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I think maybe 2 parts. The construction of the portfolio, if you want, as you were saying, yes, it's rules-based, quantitative, yes. We use data and we construct the portfolio on that. But in the evolution of the data over time, I think there is more data coming from a qualitative point of view from what you were saying is, like, for example, the science-based targets or companies that they are filling reports, let's say, on saying, well, what are your targets? If you have objectives, what are you doing in terms of stressing test your business in terms of climate? So you can see it as data that coming from qualitative parts that then we use it in the construction of the portfolio. And then you have the engagement program, yes, that obviously when they use our colleagues, they use a lot of data to evaluate companies, but it's largely, I think, well, analyzing the company, different metrics compared to its peers, and it's mostly qualitative, the analysis that our colleagues have, yes. But maybe I can stop here to see if I'm answering your question.
Yes, fine. I think Joanne wants to say something.
No, thank you very much for that. So the way I think about it is oversimplified version, but I think people like the story is for your point on the qualitative and quantitative. So on the quantitative side, when we do portfolio constructions, it's like we've got all these ingredients, we'll put them together, we'll put them in the pot, right? We construct the portfolios. And then combined with engagement, quality engagement, the end result, the outcome of it is the combination of the qualitative and quantitative. Well, of course, you know, it's very easy to exclude companies from the get-go. That's where you can get index where you can have a very specific exclusions into, you know, certain sectors. But we really believe the power in engagement because we are there in the evolution, the revolution of changing what we all want to change, being the climate, being biodiversity, and everything else comes with it. So it's really the journey, if you wish, or that cooking pot as it together. I hope it's a good story rather than confusing story.
Councillor Luciani.
I'm quite new to this, so forgive me. It's my first meeting. I'm speaking into it. It's right there. Yeah. I'll bring it even nearer. Is that better? So I don't know if you, in your big pot of ingredients, if you have the data centers, so the cloud stuff. I was doing a lot of reading about this, so it uses a lot of electricity, a lot of water. So from your education and the help that you do, have you seen some differences in that? If you that's what you're, you know, investing in. Thank you.
Yeah, again, that's a very relevant question. And for example, nowadays the carbon data is divided in three groups: scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Yes, scope 1 is direct emissions of companies. It's mainly related to companies that they buy coal or oil and gas, burn it, produce electricity, let's say. But it's also involved on direct operations of companies. Yes. So for example, that will be a scope 1. Scope 2 is operations of companies, but mostly related to indirect emissions. They're not related to the production of energy. And that is where, for example, you see like Google or other companies, if they own the data centers, the emissions of those operations should appear there, yes. And then you have, and to a degree, the data there is, I think if you compare, for example, different data providers, there is now commonality. I mean, there is more agreement, if you want to put it like that, across data providers when it comes to this type of emissions, yes. Then there is the third type, which is the scope 3, which is called indirect emissions. They are related to the supply chain, yes. Like, for example, a company rents trucks from their upstream, and indirect they have these emissions, yes. Or the downstream emissions, which are very important for the oil and gas and the autos, yes. Because if you see emissions of production of Tesla, let's say, they are equal to Ford, let's say, on emissions, yes. But then you say, well, actually the fleet of Tesla, it's all electric, yes, so it should look better, yes. So then you have to bring this scope 3 data that measures the downstream of those emissions, which is the car fleet, and then you are able more to compare these companies. So it also comes these companies that if they have a data center that they sort of is from the supply chain or they rent it, and the cooling and all these parts are technologies that they are very important on that. So those type of emissions, they come there, yes. Scope 3 is something that came in the last 2 years, and it's good that there is now more data on that. But if you compare one data provider to other data provider, there is still a lot of discrepancies. But it's good that there is now a level of, well, the data is available. Yes, you have to acknowledge the uncertainty that this data has, but at least now you can compare, let's say, Tesla with other automakers. Yes.
So that does beg the question that as more data becomes available in your analysis that you do within the portfolio, what's the process you employ to select the data points that you're going to use?
That's a very good question. I would say it is, again, it goes back when we create the strategies, again, collaboration. Yes, I think we have, and that's the positive part of UBS because we have different teams, not only in the asset manager, but we work with our colleagues on the investment bank or the wealth management on different pods, we call them, to analyze data. Yes. So for example, nowadays, the other release of data, for example, is physical risk data. Yes, to say, okay, well, if climate doesn't, the transition doesn't succeed, we will start to see effects on physical effects. Yes, like certain regions, there will be weather changes that will affect operations of companies. Yes, so there is this new data coming there. So we use these pods in collaboration to say, okay, shall we analyze the different data providers that they are there, analyze the strengths, we meet with the data providers, see the methodology, and then try to find a consensus to say, okay, well, let's start to use this data provider because of these X and Y characteristics. And over time, we have done quite a lot on, I think, even when we develop the strategy and now keeping the evolution of the strategy, I think we believe that's it's very important, that part on the data selection. Yes, and it's not only methodology. Sometimes it comes even coverage of the data. Yes, because the methodology could be good, but they tell you, okay, we have data for 5 companies in the world. You say, okay, maybe for an active portfolio manager that holds 40 stocks is good, but for us that is more rules based, close to indexing, we need data that it covers more data points. Yes, more companies on the globe. Yes.
And of course, the issue of the quality of the data and the consistency between it, so that you're comparing like with like.
Yes, no, I think 100% on that. And again, I'm bringing you these examples of the scope 3. It brings challenges there, and physical risks is a very difficult problem. Yes, I think if you have to estimate what is going to be the impact in 20 years of a factory that it's, let's say, in this location. Yes, I think one has to acknowledge that it's a difficult problem. But at the same time, when you compare to different data providers with our colleagues from the sustainable team that they have expertise on that, it helps us more to have a more judgmental approach on selecting data providers. Yes.
Shall we just quickly
Yeah.
go through performance?
Yeah, on performance, which is slide 8, and I think the rest of the slides they elaborate on that. I think an important aspect is, I think you ask for the performance since you invested on the strategy. Slide number 8, which is 221. I think the performance is again, as we set up in the objective of strategy, to stay as close as we can with respect to the benchmark. There is an underperformance that I will elaborate on that of minus 33 bips with respect to the benchmark. And in year to date, I think we have seen an improvement of the strategy of 27 bips. I think the strategy delivered 5.29 with respect to 50.02. Yes, again, is very close on the strategy. 2 aspects to mention on these 33 bips on underperformance. I would say is 2 key aspects. Is one is the volatility that we have seen on COVID period, and second is the energy crisis. I think that in particular the second part is the energy crisis that we have seen last year. Yes, last year, I think with all the geopolitical conflicts that we have seen, the energy sector has been, compared to other sectors in global equity portfolios, has been one of the strongest sectors, and that has translated in most of climate strategies. We compare to to other climate strategies or underperformance, including our cases. However, yes, I think one important aspect to mention here, which is related to our conservative approaches. Again, if we have seen the volatility that we have seen in markets on COVID period or last year on the energy crisis, I think, for example, this underperformance that we have seen, it is in line with expectations. We didn't have any negative surprise. Again, the level of risk of the strategy has been managed. I think it's in line with our expectations, which I think on our side, we feel quite comfortable on that. Yes, I think on slide 9, it shows, for example, the performance of other climate strategies that I think, to be fair, on these other strategies, they take more risk. They are more aggressive, if you want to put it like that, when it comes to climate. But this aggressiveness, if you want to put it like that, it translates in higher volatility of returns. Yes. In our case, again, we are very conservative. We managed to reach carbon reductions that are very similar to what they get with less risk. And therefore, I think if you see, well, okay, it's an underperformance, but I think what they were very extraordinary evolution of markets that I think the way that we have been managing the portfolio, it gives us some reassurance that I think that the conservative approach that we have, it is a right approach when we have seen these periods of significant market stresses.
What are the things that keep you awake at night in terms of worrying about the investments you make in the portfolio? Where do you see the biggest risks?
That's a good question. I would say probably one of the big questions that the questions I have or we have, yes, in the team is because we build up this portfolio that says, okay, well, climate is an important aspect and we should build a portfolio engagement voting program that aligns the strategy to that. Yes. However, yes, again, coming back to the energy crisis that we have seen last year, yes, to a degree, you can say, okay, probably the agenda of climate, it will be postponed on one hand, or at the same time, if you analyze the data of companies, yes, I think probably the minority of companies, they are having very ambitious targets towards climate, but most of the companies, they are either not doing enough or they are not doing anything, yes. So I think aligning that part with managing the risk of the strategy is probably something that we always discuss and keep focus on that, yes, because let's say in a case that the transition doesn't happen, yes, and we need to still build up a portfolio with regards to climate, let's say, then we have to say, okay, well, we have to take more risk or deviate more from the global portfolio because there is less companies that they are aligning their businesses while the majority is not, yes. But then you have to question, okay, that this level of risk to create a portfolio that doesn't reflect the realities, right, let's say, given that the objective of the portfolio is climate, that's one question. I think that question that we always discuss and, well, keep me some nights awake, but but not all. And that will be one. And then the second one, again, coming back to say, okay, well, maybe if this situation is happening, we should consider physical risk. And we are doing a lot of research on that to say, okay, well, probably the transition is not as fast. Therefore, we should consider the other climate risk, which is transition and physical risk. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions, people? Councillor Critchison.
Thank you. Is it the underperforming, you say, and the companies, is it because the reality and it's not being taken serious enough? Could we put more pressure on? Because if we're not reaching targets, people are doing it because it's probably the right thing to do and are not really taking it that next level yet. I mean, I'd like to see more pressure put on to really take it seriously.
You mean from an engagement perspective?
Yeah, no, I think, again, I would say again, over the years, you have seen, for example, Climate 100, yes, that, well, it's a group of asset managers and asset owners that say, okay, let's collide. We have more we have more voice if we go all together on that. That's one example. There is the asset managers net zero platform initiative, asset owners initiative that probably you are part of some of those efforts. So I think we are seeing that there is more coordination, let's say, on that. I think companies, they are also now realizing that, well, on voting programs, there is on voting seasons, there is serious demands for these companies on the engagement program. Again, I think you see how the what you ask to companies has evolved positively over time. So I would say I will be optimistic on the efforts that we are doing. Obviously, there is more to do, and probably the energy crisis of last year sort of brings a bit of challenges there. But I would say I think overall there is I think the efforts, I think as more people or more platform, more initiatives they are, I would be positive on that evolution. But again, it is being conscious on being very active on the voting and engagement and the engagement program, such that we can get tangible. Actually, what we are doing, it starts to change the behavior of companies. Yes.
And our engagement program is 3 years as a cycle. So we do really work with those companies that we want to influence from a positive point of view. And using the example of Climate 100, collectively for all the asset managers and asset owners, the entity has something like 40-50 trillion, that's adding even more zeros behind, of influence towards to the specific company to make sure that they get the message, they do the right thing on that journey. So I think, you know, for us to them, we also need to give them the opportunity as well to transition, just to get themselves onto the right trajectory. But if after the 3 years lab, we still don't see tangible impact, we do exclude them from our portfolio. I think for climate life, for climate aware, there are 8 companies that we have been excluding over the past year. So there is clearly consequences, right, if they don't do the right thing. But we do give them the amber opportunity. Exactly.
All right, we do need to wrap it up. People move on, but perhaps the last question, Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you for such an informative and enjoyable presentation. It's one of the very few ones I can sit here and understand what you're talking about. That was very good. Thank you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much.
Rand, Rodrigo, thank you very much indeed for coming today and for your very informative discussion. Most of my thunder's been stolen by Councillor Ward. But thank you again.
Thank you. Can we come back again next year? We love here, don't we?
Well, we're good at inviting people.
No, thanks for the time. A pleasure. And any question, I think we are here to help.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.